That's right. Bear down, Bears fans. It's time for another edition of the Chicago Bears podcast, Bears Banter, powered by Second City Gridiron. Bill Zimmerman with you. And whoo, we got plenty to talk about again. The Chicago Bears show up for this one, but still lose to the Green Bay Packers. And a lot can once again be put on the shoulders of a one, Matt Eberflus. So we are going to talk about it all, and we are going to talk about it with Adam Jahns of The Athletic and, of course, the Hogan Jahns podcast. You know him well. He is going to be by here in just a little bit. But before we talk to Adam, I've got some things I need to get off my chest. And I really want to start with positives here because there were some positives with Caleb Williams. But I can't. I can't start with the positives when there's a giant elephant in the room. And it's not me this time. It is not me. The giant elephant is the coaching ability of one Matt Eberflus. And how, are we just going to just stay in the hamster wheel and run in a circle over and over and over for the rest of the season, not making any modicum of improvement because the coach continues to leave this team behind? Can we do something about this, George McCaskey? Because you've never done it in 105 years doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It might have meant that you just haven't screwed up this much in the past, or that maybe you should have done things like Mark Trestman in the past, maybe even John Fox in the past. There were times you should have done it and didn't do it. So don't continue to make the same mistakes, George, because you want to have, I've never fired a coach, and my, father and my grandfather have never fired a coach in the middle of the season. Well, your grandfather won a lot more than he lost for 50 years on those sidelines. And since he's left, the results haven't been good other than about 5 years in the 80s and 3 years in the early 2000s. So, George, we can change things up a little. And maybe, just maybe, you can pull out the Coke book, take out a second loan on the Arlington Heights property. Then you've got some money to pay off Matt Eberflus. Do something, George. Because we can't sit here for the rest of the season and just slam our heads into the wall because you refuse to do something. Matt Eberflus needs to be fired. And I actually saw some people, they only lost by one. Bad luck on the field goal, and that's all they needed, and they would have changed things. Well, let's summarize it here with a tweet from, and I'm going to credit this because a lot of people on Twitter don't like to credit anyone. Jeff Bartlett 85 is where I saw this originally. And it's a heck of a graphic. And that graphic is active NFL head coaching records in one-score games. And Matt Eberflus is 5-17. And I did go and fact-check Matt Eberflus. I did not fact-check all the coaches. I fact-checked 2 at random, and they were correct. And Matt Eberflus was correct. So I do think this graphic is correct. I can't say exactly where it came from. But Matt Eberflus is 5-17 in one-score games. Like, he breaks the graph. If you're watching on YouTube, the graph is kind of a straight angle line. It almost works perfectly as the best coaches: Kevin O'Connell, Nick Sirianni, DeMeco Ryans, Jim Harbaugh, Matt LaFleur, Mike Tomlin, Sean McVay, Andy Reid. You notice a lot of these really good coaches are at the top of these one-score game records, but it's like a flat line. And then you get to Matt Eberflus, and the dot just jumps way to the left because his record is embarrassing in one-score games. And Ryan Poles can't keep sitting there and saying, it was the first season, because his record is bad in seasons 2 and 3 in one-score games as well. When it comes down to coaching, Matt Eberflus fails this football team, and he fails them over and over and over again. And at what point is enough enough? Because when you sit here with the Washington Commanders and Dan Quinn and the players are like, We were really surprised. They gave us 13 free yards and allowed us to advance at the midfield so we could attempt a Hail Mary. Otherwise, we couldn't have attempted a Hail Mary. Tony Romo in the broadcast is going, you can't give them free yards because they can't do a Hail Mary from this spot. Everybody saw it. And yet again, the coach decides to give them 13 free yards to the point that the Commanders were shocked that happened. Advance it here to this Packers game. And then you have a report from Courtney Cronin and other writers in The Athletic who were in the Packers locker room, and they asked them about the blocked field goal. And they said, well, we noticed that Cairo Santos has low trajectory on deeper field goals, and we thought they'd try and advance it further. And we were surprised that they settled for the field goal that they did. And that's where we are with Matt Eberflus, is that opponents are confused with what the coach is doing because the decisions are that bad. That's where we are with Matt Eberflus. Like the amount of things that come out about Matt, every statistic, like 5-17 in one-score games is awful. His overall record, 14-30, whatever it is. Like he's right there with John Fox for one of the worst records in Chicago Bears history as a head coach. I saw another one. He's blown, according to Marquee Sports Network, he's blown 9 fourth-quarter leads, which is tied for the most in the NFL since 2022. Like Matt Eberflus destroys games. He loses football games. That's what he does. He should not be a head coach. Go be a defensive coordinator. He cannot be a head coach when he continues to fail this organization with what he does on the sidelines. And I know I tried to put positive spins on it all offseason. I said the best thing for the Chicago Bears is if Matt Eberflus succeeds. And it's true. That would have been the best thing for the Bears, but he is not going to succeed. And I didn't really understand why so much positivity was around a guy because he got a haircut and grew a beard. Like all of a sudden, Matt Eberflus is Matt LaFleur. Like I don't understand what happened. Everybody loved the blow up and everyone was flying high, but the same crap continues to happen in these football games. And when you have teams confused about what the Chicago Bears are doing at the end of a game and settling for a 46, 47-yard field goal, when if you could have gotten 8 more yards, which you could have run potentially 3 plays there. You could have run a play and spiked the football if they got another first down. You had a timeout. There were so many different options you could have done. You could have run the football. You still could have, like all these different things. They could have had 2 plays, had them in, run the football, come up to the line of scrimmage, throw a pass. Like there were multiple things you could have done. I would not have had a problem if they threw a high percentage pass there, where if it, one read pass, and if it's not there, Caleb throws it away. There were so many things they could have done that could have safely advanced the ball. But Matt Eberflus, coach scared again. That's what he does. He's afraid to put the ball in his players' hands. And the perfect quote by that is what Eberflus said about why they did what they did. And if I was a player in this locker room, I would be pissed, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I would be genuinely pissed. And you want to talk about accountability? And Caleb Williams continues to stand up, whether it's publicly at press conferences or privately. When Shane Waldron gets fired, Caleb Williams stands up and apologizes to the team that he got Shane Waldron fired because he didn't play well enough. That's accountability. That might be too much accountability, but that's what you want to see out of your team leaders. And the biggest team leader you have is your damn coach. And the coach stands up there after the game and goes, we didn't want to risk a fumble. We didn't want to risk a holding penalty. We didn't want to risk a procedure penalty. We worried about a tip pass and maybe a turnover. Like we could have gotten a sack. All he does is focus on the negatives. So when your coach stands up there, what is he saying? Just think about it for a second. What is he saying? He's not just saying, I'm coaching scared. He's saying, I don't trust my players to not screw up. That is what he just said to the media. And if I was Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, DeAndre Swift, Roschon Johnson, anyone on that offensive line, Cole Kmet, I'm naming everyone. I would be pissed. I would be like, F you, coach. Seriously? We just drove the ball down the field. You chose not to go for 8 more yards, not us. You chose for it. And the reason that we didn't try it is because you thought we were going to screw up after we marched down the field and had the Packers on their heels. That's BS, man. That's how you lose a locker room. It's not just about coaching poorly and making poor decisions where the team feels that they can't win because the coach can't put them in a position to succeed. It's not just that. You lose a locker room when the players don't think you have their back. And right now, when they want to talk about culture and they want to talk about all the great things they're doing, and this Monday to Saturday stuff that everyone fed me about how good Eberflus was Monday to Saturday, I'm starting to question that. You can't be that amazing and have every player pissed at you. But hey, here we are. So Matt Eberflus is going to stand up there and say, I was worried my players were going to screw up, so I kicked a 47-yard field goal. That is what he said, and there is no other way to interpret it. And if I was a player, I would be pissed. And I would go to Ryan Poles, and I would say, screw this guy. Screw this guy. This is the guy you want us to coach? I would be pissed. End of story. And that brings me to Ryan Poles, because we need to talk about Ryan Poles as well. And I just realized I haven't talked about Caleb Williams. Well, we'll finish with some positivity. I'll talk about Ryan Poles, then we'll talk about Caleb Williams and get to Adam Jahns. Ryan Poles. You got to start thinking long and hard about what's the best path here with Ryan Poles. Should Ryan Poles keep his job? I think that's a great question. And I put out a poll, and thousands of you participated. I appreciate that. And you came back and you said 55% said Ryan Poles needs to stay. And where I am right now is Ryan Poles needs to stay, because I think that's the best thing for Caleb Williams' development. And that's it. If the Bears were going to have the number 1 pick this year, and if there was a great quarterback this year, I'd want Ryan Poles gone. So this isn't about what Ryan Poles' resume is. This is about what's best for Caleb Williams. His resume isn't awful. It's just not amazing. And we're not privy to exactly what the decision was with Matt Eberflus. Matt Eberflus had 3 years left on his contract after last season, if that's correct, now that he has a 5-year deal. So was firing Matt Eberflus even on the table for Ryan Poles? Maybe when he found out he wasn't on the table, he started pounding the table publicly about how much he loves Matt Eberflus because he knew he was going to be back. And he didn't want people speculating about him potentially getting fired. Maybe that happened. Or maybe Ryan Poles does believe that Matt Eberflus is the best guy for the job. We don't know what's going on in his head. But right now, Kevin Warren has a pretty good idea, and so should George, about what Ryan Poles truly felt about his head coach. And if he had some doubt, then Kevin Warren and George McCaskey are giving Ryan Poles credit right now for knowing that there was some doubt and he was not allowed to make a move. But if Ryan Poles was allowed to make a move and he said, no, Matt Eberflus is my guy, well, then you need to question his thought process and his decision-making. Because other than the Carolina Panthers trade, which is an amazing trade, he has a very spotty record as general manager. Nate Davis is now released. They're paying him $4 or $5 million to sit on his sofa, which is what Nate Davis has wanted apparently for a year and a half. That Nate Davis signing was awful. The Chase Claypool trade, they lit the 33rd pick in the draft on fire for Chase Claypool. That trade was awful. So, free agent acquisitions were kind of in the middle of the road. Some were pretty good. Some were, he found Billings, Tremaine Edmonds, a lot of money for Tremaine Edmonds. You can question that contract, but TJ Edwards was a good signing. Failed with Tanyan, failed with Everett. He has not found a second tight end to complement Cole Kmet. Keenan Allen's been okay, not worth $23 million, but he's useful. DJ Moore gets extended. Look, he's made some good moves, but he's made some questionable moves. You look in the draft. Is Darnell Wright a cornerstone piece worth $25 million a year by the time he needs a contract extension? I don't know. He hasn't really progressed this year. Braxton Jones had a really nice game yesterday, but is Braxton Jones your left tackle for the next decade? Now, again, you get 4 years as a starting tackle, as a 5th-round pick left tackle. That's a good draft pick, so you don't take that away from him. But Any of those other guys, Zach Thomas, Doug Kramer, Tyree Carter, they're all gone. Again, those were lottery pick, basically guys. Took a punter in the 4th round. It looks good. But again, like you draft a safety in the 2nd round with Brisker, that has to hit. That's a very high percentage hit position in round 2. Same with a nickel corner in Gordon. Same with a punter in round 4. You're going to invest that kind of capital in those positions. They have to hit at that point. Like that's basically positional value. So when you look at Ryan Poles here, yes, he's had some hits, but like if he missed on Brisker, that would have been a major problem. If he missed on like Gordon, if he missed on Taylor with that kind of draft capital for those level of positions, that's where you get more concern. Velus Jones was an awful draft pick. Like he couldn't even make it through his rookie contract. Like there are a lot of those. Zach Pickens. Anyone confident in Zach Pickens right now? I sure aren't. So when we look at Ryan Poles, it's a spotty resume. It's not an awful resume, but it's not a great resume. If it was an awful resume, you'd have to make a move. If it was a great resume, you'd have to make sure you keep him. But Ryan Poles is on the fence. And if he's on the fence, then I think the best thing for Caleb Williams is to keep this regime in place, not tear everything up, because we know GMs like to come in here and bring in their own guys. You can't bring a GM in here and say, all right, Caleb Williams is your quarterback with Cole Kmet, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Darnell Wright, a bunch of these defensive players, and you're going to keep them all. Like that's not what a GM does. So if you're going to have a lot of turnover again, if you have a new GM in here, I think more stability is better for Caleb Williams. So I would do that. Right now, I would keep Ryan Poles and I would let him pick a new coach. But that's a big risk because he has to get it right. And if he has been truly behind Matt Eberflus, that's dangerous. I'm just going to say it. That is a dangerous situation to be in for the Chicago Bears because Caleb Williams is everything. And when we see Caleb Williams, and that's what I'll finish with here before we get to Adam Jahns, when we see Caleb Williams play like that, when we see Caleb Williams play like that, like he's capable of, and we saw it against Jacksonville, and we saw it against Carolina. Now we see him play really well against Green Bay. We see him play really well at the end of Washington. You know what pisses me off? When media members are going, well, the Bears were disappointed that Caleb Williams wasn't as ready as they thought he would be. Oh, really? Where do you think those media members were getting that piece of information? Do you think that maybe that was coming from the Bears organization and that coaches, general managers, whoever it might be, player personnel directors, I'm not saying it was someone specific, but someone within the Bears organization went to the media and went, well, the quarterback wasn't as good as we thought he was going to be out of the gate. So that's caused problems. You're shifting blame on the new franchise quarterback. That's BS, man. Oh, that pissed me off. That might have pissed me off more than the Matt Eberflus comment about, not trusting his players. You're going to blame Caleb Williams after fans with their own eyes saw promise against Indianapolis, efficiency against the LA Rams, greatness against Jacksonville and against Carolina, clutch play against Washington, solid, very good play after a couple awful games in a row against Green Bay, your big rival. We saw all that with our own eyes. And you're going to blame the quarterback? Ho, we're going to play that game? Well, Carl Williams, I hope you were listening because I know you can swing that stick around pretty good back there. I know what those tweets were. You can say they didn't mean anything. I know what they were. And you know that you and your son have some power here about decision-making. And I'm not saying Carl Williams is holding the Bears hostage. Don't twist my words. But when you start going after the quarterback, I'd have problems if I was Carl Williams. I would have problems. You're going to say the QB wasn't ready. Oh, baby. Because what we saw against Green Bay, the QB is ready. The QB is ready. I'm not saying the QB is a superstar right now, but he is ready to play. Caleb Williams, with an effective offensive coordinator, can have an offense scoring 22, 23 points a game, and he could throw 20 to 25 touchdowns. He hasn't turned the ball over since like September. And we're saying this guy's not ready? I mean, come the F on. Like, I have had it with this crap getting leaked to the media all the time from Ryan Poles or whoever is in his minions is leaking stuff out there. And Matt Eberflus saying he doesn't trust his players, and someone else saying that Caleb Williams wasn't as ready as they hoped. This is a mess. And this is why George McCaskey, we're going to loop all the way back to the start. George McCaskey has to get off his ass, go into Kevin Warren's office, and say, cut this man a check and get him out of Halas Hall. And that man, of course, is Matt Eberflus. Adam Jahns joins me next. This is Bill Zimmerman, Bears Banter. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back into the podcast. Always excited to have this guy on. He's been nice enough to come on every year the last few years, and it's always a great, compelling conversation. And I seem to be saying this to all my guests this year. And one of these years, it's going to be a really positive, uplifting conversation. But again, the Chicago Bears are struggling. And again, Adam Jahns joins from The Athletic when that is exactly what's happening at Soldier Field and at Halas Hall. And he joins me now. Adam, Bill Zimmerman, how you doing?
Bill. We'll try to make it uplifting. We'll try to make it positive. We'll try. I'll give you that.
All we can do is try. To start my podcast, I was not very positive. Another frustrating game, especially when it comes at the hands of the Green Bay Packers. And of course, I forgot to mention Hogue and Jahns. Make sure you catch Adam and Adam Hogue there Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Great podcast, one of the best around in the Bears sphere. But Adam, let's just start with the Packers game. Let's start positive. You said we're going to try and make it positive. Let's start positive. Let's talk about Caleb Williams and Thomas Brown. Let's start there because there was certainly a spark in the offense. It wasn't Detroit Lions spark, but it looked certainly far more competent. Caleb looked decisive, got the ball out quickly. Offensive line certainly helped with some injuries and some of the players coming back there. But what was your reaction to the offense and Caleb Williams' performance? Let's start there.
Well, last I checked, Bill, 19 points is better than 3 points. So that was a positive step in the right direction for Thomas Brown's. Well, it was really his debut as play caller, as offensive coordinator for the Bears. So like that to me is a positive. The guy he's been on the job less than a week. And he's able to do that against a pretty good defense. I know the Packers aren't top 5. I know there's a benefit to having some newness where you're not the Packers don't have a full week's worth of game film like the Minnesota Vikings have this week. But to see the condensed formations, to see the motions in every single snap, just to see DJ Moore getting the ball in different ways, to see Cole Kmet getting the ball in different ways. I thought that was just a positive, a lot of positive steps in the right direction. Quick throws from Caleb Williams, some play action for Caleb Williams. The completion percentage went up. I liked it. It's the Sean McVay system. I think there's room to add more. 19 points is a good starting point. Again, the Vikings will be tougher this week, but just like if I'm just looking at it in this week span, taking over on Tuesday, playing a pretty good defense in the Packers, producing 19 points and putting the Bears in winning position at the end, like that's a good debut for Thomas Brown.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I was really pleased with what I saw and a lot of concepts that I kind of thought we would see throughout the season. And it's not that they were all foreign. It just seemed to be that they got away from anything that was working. So, I mean, but before we go a little bit further in the Packers game, let me take a minute then to ask you about the Shane Waldron situation. And obviously I know that was a last week's story. But I find it interesting that Caleb Williams can, and I understand the defenses weren't great, but can look so good in certain games. And then to have everything fall apart the way it did in those 3 consecutive weeks, it was, I can't wrap my head around what exactly went wrong. And I know some people wanted to point the finger specifically at Waldron or offensive line injuries or Caleb Williams, not being decisive with the football. And I think it's a little of every column, but you've covered a lot of roller coasters at Halas Hall and at Soldier Field. Have you ever seen something like that where going into a bye, I assume you and the beat and the people covering this team were going, this is headed in the right direction. This is fun. This is going to be an exciting season. To have it unravel so quickly and with so few answers as to why.
Well, there were some early signs when Shane Waldron himself is bringing up meetings with the team leadership. Like that was a storyline. I want to say the second or third week of the season.
Right.
Like that to me is like, oh, this is interesting. Let's take note of this for later. This doesn't sound something good to happen this early in the season. Something seems off. So to me, I had called them red flags and Hogan Jahns. That was some early on, like, okay, this could be interesting. And then you had the game against the Panthers. You had the game against the Jaguars. Like, okay, Shane Waldron has found what works for Caleb Williams. And albeit those are two bad defenses, but they crushed them. They weren't just like sneaking out with victories. They were blowing away bad teams. And that to me was, okay, something's working. You have Ryan Poles himself saying that Shane Waldron has had an open line of communication with everybody. And that's a positive. So I'm like, you could see signs of this. And then you get to the Washington game. Just an ugly game. Maybe Caleb Williams just wasn't feeling right in his return, home to that area. Maybe he was feeling some pressure. And then at the end, like, he came alive. The Bears offense worked when it needed to. He delivered a win until the win wasn't there because of the Hail Mary. Then you heard one more. Some of the same red flags that came up earlier. Like, why are they having so many meetings? Why are they having so many talks with the leadership? Like, something seems off. And then you had, like, I just think the tipping point was that Hail Mary for this team. I think a lot of players were frustrated in a lot of different avenues, and I think a lot of that spilled over into Shane Waldron's office. Like, the offense just wasn't clicking the way it needed to. Like the games against the Panthers and Jaguars, we can only be so happy about that. So, yeah, it's interesting. I know this is a long-winded answer for you, but I think there were some early signs, especially when you heard Waldron himself bring up those team leadership meetings, and to have that be a storyline again, now 7-8 weeks in the season. Like, okay, something is off here. Something is off with what Shane Waldron is trying to install. Conversations about his scripts came up. There were just too many red flags popping up for Shane Waldron.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, and tying that to early aspects of the season. It makes a lot of sense, and it just kind of tells you that something was bubbling there for quite a while. But yeah, we did see an improvement in the offense against the Packers. I certainly went into this game thinking it was going to be a typical Bears-Packers game where it was going to be a 2-score defeat. The Bears did a heck of a job staying in it, but I have to ask you about Matt Eberflus. He's been a topic again this week. He's been a topic the last several weeks. And when you have and this is what I'll bring up. When you have Packers players afterwards saying, we were surprised they didn't try and advance the ball further with 35 seconds and a timeout. And then a couple weeks prior, you have Dan Quinn and Washington players saying, we were surprised Matt Eberflus gave us that 13 free yards before the Hail Mary. At what point, Adam, do you think the front office looks at this and looks at Matt Eberflus's terrible record that surfaced there we saw this week in 1-score games, where this front office maybe sits there and goes, I know Ryan Poles was a fervent supporter of him last year, but where you sit here and go, this isn't the right guy for this team.
Well, those are 2 losses you could put on coaching, starting at the very top. Forget everything we just said about Shane Waldron. At the end of the day, in Washington, Matt Eberflus's defense had a chance to preserve that win, to secure that win. And they gave up an extra completion, and then everything just broke down on that Hail Mary. Like, call a timeout. Like you saw Jim Harbaugh do literally this week in his game, where, this is just kind of funny, where there he is in field goal range. He doesn't take a knee. He doesn't let the clock wind down. What does he do? He runs the ball one more time, and his guy scores a touchdown. Then literally after that, what happens? He sees who are they playing?
The Bengals.
The Bengals. He sees what the Bengals do on the field in terms of what their Hail Mary setup is going to be, calls a timeout, gets everybody together, gets everybody in place, and then he blitzes. Even on top of that, when the snap is, when the play is going on. So just a different philosophy. And yeah,
and a guy that a lot of Bears fans wanted.
Yes, yeah, that's the whole frustrating thing. So I'm sure there's frustrations in the front office. There has to be. Those were 2 wins. They should be 6-4. 2 plays have prevented them from being 6-4 and just having this season be extremely different in just terms of confidence, narrative, all the above. It should be a 6-4 football team, and they blew it on 2 plays where you have to look at what Matt Eberflus's decision making led to. Just speaking about the Packers game, I don't like his explanation. I don't like coaching scared. I don't like when Mark Trestman explained himself years ago about it. I don't like what Matt Nagy said years ago about it. Help out your kicker. Get closer. Show some confidence. Have an understanding for the moment. The Bears had so much momentum going in the final 2 minutes with Caleb Williams. Have some faith in your players to get the ball out, to get another completion, to get another 4 or 5 yards, to even get 3 yards. Your kicker is closer. They've kept that momentum. The offensive line feels good about what they're doing, sort of having the seconds tick off the clock, and you just have the vibe change when that happened at Soldier Field. I said that in Hogan Jahns. I didn't like it. I don't like that way of coaching.
Yeah, and let me ask you this, and you tell me if you think this is a fair leap. And like you said, you didn't like his explanation, and his explanation, of course, was we could have had a fumble, we could have had a procedure penalty, a lot of things could have gone wrong. And then ESPN's Get Up puts up the statistic, and this is what I was talking about: is you were so close to getting within 40 yards, which is when Cairo is automatic, literally automatic, has not missed since he's come to the Bears here in 2019 or whatever it was, from inside 40 yards. And you're sitting there just about 7-8 yards away from it, and you not take the knee, but you run into the line and let it click down, call the timeout. We obviously we know what happened, but when they say, that went from a 76% chance for Santos to 100% if they had gone for those 8 yards, and the odds of a fumble were less than 1%. If I'm a player in that locker room, and this is where I want you to tell me if you think this is a fair leap, and you hear your head coach saying, we could have fumbled, we could have had a tip pass, we could have had a procedure penalty, a holding penalty, and screwed everything up. When you have the Packers on their heels and you hear that, does that not come across as Matt Eberflus telling the media that he didn't trust his guys to execute in that moment and was too afraid they were going to make a mistake?
100%. I think it's the only way to look at it.
And that, to me, as a player, I'd be upset because I hear a lot of times he says that they didn't execute things properly, and he does not put it on coaching nearly as often to those press conferences. I think I'd be very frustrated in that locker room.
Yeah, I'd be annoyed. I think DJ Moore's, like, the vibe that he presented afterwards was like, well, yeah, I wanted to try one more play. And I think a lot of players would agree with that. But at the end of the day, you're going to stand by your head coach's decision. You're going to try to say the right things. But I think a number of those players in that locker room wanted at least one more play. And I don't care if they're stacking the box. Go get 2 or 3 more yards. Go have your offensive line be assertive for one more play instead of being on their heels almost immediately because you let that break occur. And maybe trust your quarterback. I get it. He's a rookie. Like, how many times have you seen this? They stack the box, play action play, quick throw to the outside. Right to the sideline, right at the sticks, even shorter than the sticks. Get your 4 or 5 yards, get out of bounds, you tackle, take the timeout. The Bears had the timeout. You've seen that so many times, especially like Aaron Rodgers would do such things. Take advantage of those numbers to your benefit outside. Maybe have some faith in your first overall pick quarterback. But yeah, I don't think that's a stretch by any means in terms of what you're saying.
All right, so let me ask you this, and I know I've asked you this one in the past, and we've always had the same answer, and maybe you're going to have the same answer here, and that is, if the Bears decide that Matt Eberflus is not the right guy for this particular team moving forward, about when the right time is to dismiss him. Because to me, and obviously it was better with Thomas Brown, but the conservative play calling, the playing not to lose mentality is not something you want festering around in the locker room, if you ask me. And I know, you and Hogue talk a lot about Greg Braggs and some of the stuff he says, and Braggs is sitting there. He's circled the day after Thanksgiving as the Black Friday here. And I get where he's coming from. It'd be 6 straight losses, 3 straight losses in the division if that happens. Obviously, if the Bears win a game, that changes everything. But if the Bears continue to lose, with Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles saying they're here to do things differently and break cycles, do you think they would actually consider dismissing a coach in the middle of the season?
You know what? I'd still be stunned. I'd be stunned. It's just, I know what you're saying. I know what Braggs is saying, but I just have to see it to believe it. Like, part of me wants to believe that even firing Shane Waldron is a sign that the Bears are operating differently. Like, they weren't going to tolerate this for their young quarterback. I don't know. George McCaskey, this is above Kevin Warren. This is a George McCaskey preference. Maybe Kevin Warren can convince him otherwise. But until I actually see it, like, I don't think it's going to happen because it's never happened. And we've had, like, this season is bad. I get it. But like 2014 was like really, really bad. Really, really bad under Mark Trestman. I mean, we can't remember, like, I can't remember everything bad that happened, but there was a lot. I know it was more than this year.
I will always remember 42-0 at halftime to the Packers on Sunday Night Football. That's burned in my brain.
His offensive coordinator was outed as a source for an anonymous report ripping your quarterback, whom you just paid. And Mark Trestman still stood by him. So, like, okay, if they're not going to fire Mark Trestman in that instance, I don't see I can't see it for Matt Eberflus. I just can't. I know fans don't want to hear this. Maybe they think Kevin Warren functions differently, but I really have to see it to believe it.
All right. Well, let me ask you this one, and this is strictly a hypothetical, but this is asking someone who's been around Hallis Hall and knows and has talked to Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren and George and all these guys. The Bears have obviously circled a candidate that they really want for obvious reasons, and that's Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. And I am putting the cart way in front of the horse with this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. And that is the report that came out last year that Ben Johnson wants a lot of money. And what he's doing in Detroit right now, he's certainly backing that up. And there are teams, and I don't know who the Dallas Cowboys who are going to go for, assuming they need a new head coach. But there are going to be some teams with pretty deep pocketbooks that are probably going to be willing to give Ben Johnson a lot of money. But Ben Johnson, if Albert Breer is correct, may want to come and coach someone like Caleb Williams. So if it comes down to money, the Chicago Bears, we know they never pay their coaches a ton of money. They've only fired Mark Trestman as a coach with 2 years left on his contract. Eberflus potentially would have 2 years left here if they do move on from him after this year. Do you think the new Chicago Bears with Kevin Warren and all would go into the pocketbooks and pay a guy like Ben Johnson, a 6-year contract, $10, $12 million, $14 million a year, if that's what it takes to bring him in? Do you think the Bears would operate that way?
Well, I think there's a few layers to that, because if you're presenting that contract, that head coach candidate, like, then you have to re-up Ryan Poles' own contract. So they're
right
in lockstep. Or are you just completely cleaning house and you're letting Ben Johnson come in, and then you're letting him find his GM, kind of the reverse thing, like the Jim Harbaugh decision in a sense. So I think there's different layers to this. And one of them is, say you do fire Eberflus, so that's more money being paid for someone who's not here. Like, it's like Nate Davis, more money being paid for someone who's not here. Then you have this whole stadium thing, right? The Bears own a big piece of property in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. They're not even using, but they got to still pay for it. They still got to maintain. They're still there's still so much money being spent without a stadium, even close to being built. You know what I'm trying to get here? Like,
yeah.
At some point, there's got to be a line here and be like, well, no, we can't keep just spending money on things that we don't have, or coaches who aren't here, or stadium we're not even building. Like, what are we doing here? Like, we're the NFL. Like, the NFL prints money, but there's got to be some limit there at some point. Do I think the Bears should be aggressive in pursuing like a Ben Johnson? Yeah, maybe. But on the flip side, I think Ben Johnson is going to be very, very particular about what situation he wants for himself. Like, you always hear this with GM candidates. They got to find the right situation for themselves, the right team, the right organization, the right ownership group for themselves. I think Ben Johnson has put himself in a situation where he's like that now as a head coach. He could actually be extremely picky for where he wants to go. There could be as many as 8, 10 head coach openings after this year. I mean, those are some of the estimates being thrown out there. So he could pick the best situation for himself. That could be contract. That could be the money attached to that contract. That could be the quarterback he wants. That could be the GM he wants to work with. That could be the ownership he wants to work with. So Ben Johnson seems to have quite a lot of leverage for a first-time head coach.
Yeah, he certainly does. And you had mentioned it a little bit in that answer. So this was my last question for you. Is is Ryan Poles and what you think of his tenure, and what you think, more importantly, what you think George and Kevin think of his tenure. Because I put out a poll, and this is when the fan base was in a fervor, and put out, do you think it should be Eberflus only or Eberflus and Poles if the Bears make changes? And 55% of the fans, and there was several thousand votes, there was a lot of votes, so it said 55% said they still want Ryan Poles to stay as the general manager. And I'm on the fence right now, because I do think he's done some good things, but my focus is more about Caleb Williams, and I worry about a full regime change and what that could do in terms of his growth. But at the same time, I know you also need to make sure you find the right coach for that as well. So while you can't take away the Carolina Panthers trade, because it was honestly, I think it's going to become one of the greatest trades in NFL history. But while you can't take that away, outside of that, it's a pretty good resume, but it is not a home run resume with what he's done in Chicago. And obviously the Matt Eberflus decision, if that was his, we don't know. I don't exactly know what was, would he have been allowed to dismiss a coach with 3 years left on his contract? You tell me. But where are you with Ryan Poles, this decision on Matt Eberflus, and if his seat, if you think it should be warm, but more importantly, if you think it's warm at Halas Hall?
I think my opinion is heavily influenced by what George McCaskey said years ago, and just how proud he was about the process that resulted in Ryan Poles being or becoming the Bears GM, replacing Ryan Pace, whom the McCaskies adored, whom Ted Phillips adored. They were really happy with the process, like extremely happy with the process that led to Ryan Poles. And they were extremely enthusiastic about his hiring. And they got on board with what this was for Ryan Poles. They knew that first year was going to be miserable. No matter what McCaskey said about, always being competitive, always thinking about the playoffs, always thinking about the Super Bowl, they had to tear down before they built back up. So he was on board with that. George McCaskey was on board with that. I just think if you're George McCaskey, you probably wanted a little bit more at this point, just in terms of the years after. So now it's 2 seasons, a season and a half after that teardown. You probably wanted a few more victories. Some of that's on the head coach. Some of that's on changing quarterbacks. There's a lot of things that kind of reset clocks here, but I'm with you. I think a full reset, I'm talking about Eberflus gone, Poles gone, and Caleb Williams being the remaining piece of the 3 most important people you need for football success. That could be, catastrophic if you really believe in Caleb Williams. Maybe he's good enough to overcome such things. There are certain signs of that being true, but I think you're just setting things back for yourself again. Maybe just trust what your process from years ago, and give your GM more runway as almost promised. And GMs historically tend to get more runway than head coaches do.
Yeah, I agree, and that's the thing. Like my focus here, Caleb Williams' development. I think that has to put above and beyond everything. And if you think the best development is keeping Ryan Poles, then I think that's absolutely what you need to do. So there he is, Adam Jahns from The Athletic. You can read him there, and of course the Hogan Jahns podcast, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Make sure you check that out on the YouTube page. Get all the merch, everything. Great podcast there, Adam. Thanks for so much time, and one of these years, it's going to be positive. They're going to have a winning record, and we're going to be talking about playoffs.
I think one of these years is the old Lions slogan for some. Isn't
but
that
it happened. It finally happened.
It did. They've had a couple good years since then. Bill, always a pleasure. Anytime, my friend.
All right. There he is, Adam Jahns. Good conversation. They always are good conversations with Adam Jahns. That was another good one right there. And, gave you some positive things to think about, but gave you some, I don't know if things are going to go the way Bears fans want them to go kind of things to think about as well. So it's typical, but that's why you get these guys on who know the heart rate there and the pulse over at Halas Hall, and they can kind of tell you how they feel things might go. And you clearly, Adam thinks Matt Eberflus will be here for the full year. So if you have your hopes set up, because Greg Braggs is tweeting out Friday after Thanksgiving, again, Jahns can be wrong, I can be wrong, but I am not feeling that. I expect him to be here. I want George to do it, but I don't know if he will. So we have Matt Eberflus here for potentially a couple more months. But you know what else is here for a couple more months, and in a good way? Underdog Fantasy. They're here for a lot more than a couple months. Underdog is the place to play if you're a sports fan looking to win money while watching sports. With over 5 million happy players and 2 billion with a B1, Underdog makes it fun and easy to cash in on all your favorite athletes' performances. Compete against players just by selecting higher or lower on 2 or more players' stats, and you could win up to 1,000 times your money. So turn every touchdown into a win with Underdog. All right. You can, Underdog's available in 33 states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. They've got all your favorite leagues, teams, and stars to choose from. Create entries with all football selections or mix and match across all your other favorite sports. Underdog puts the power to cash out in your hands. You can keep riding with your entry or tap the win now button and cash out whenever you want. If you use our promo code here at Second City Gridiron, that's City, C-I-T-Y, you get up to $1,000 in bonus cash immediately. So download the Underdog app today, use the code CITY, C-I-T-Y, get $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. I use the app. I love the app. It's easy to download, has a lot of great games. Like you can play Red Zone Rush where you just swipe left or swipe right if you think a player is going to score a touchdown. A lot of different fun games you can enter. It's not just like some of those other traditional sites. So get with Underdog, download the app, and start playing today. Now, you must be 18 or over. You must be 19 or over in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 and over in Colorado for some games, 21 and over in Massachusetts and Arizona. You have to be present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply, void in Colorado. If you're concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, you can call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. That's 1-800-639-8783 or text Next Step to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. That is Underdog Fantasy. Very happy to have them as a sponsor on our show. Now, let's get to the mailbag. The mailbag, we've got plenty to get to. We're going to get to as many as we can here. And we're going to start with a question from Blue Sky. Yes, at Bill T. Zimmerman on Blue Sky. You can get me over there. Obviously, still on Twitter, very active on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, but also on Blue Sky. So we've got one from Indy Bears fan. Does Eberflus make it to Black Monday? I know the answer already, but I just want to have hope someone can brighten the day and say there's a chance he's gone sooner. Well, unfortunately, Indy Bears fan, I cannot brighten your day. If he gets fired before Black Monday, I think it's like after week 17, right? Like it's with 1 week to spare kind of thing. I just can't see them doing it in the middle of the season. I think Greg Braggs is right that it makes a lot of sense. If you're going to do it, it makes a lot of sense to try and get it done after Thanksgiving, where you have a lot of games left to play and you can make a positive impact on the game. But I just don't see it. I just can't see George McCaskey doing it, although I think it's very clear and very obvious and it needs to happen. I'm curious what kind of conversations are being had at Hallis Hall right now, but I just don't see it happening, and that's very unfortunate. All right, let's get to some of these. Michael Rowland, presuming Poles is retained, who would you identify as the second pass rushers he would target either in free agency or via trade? Well, here's what I would say to that, Michael. You've already paid Montez Sweat, and you're probably going to pay Gervon Dexter. So do you go out and go after a guy like Josh Sweat? Now, I know he tried to get Judon, but Judon wouldn't have been wildly expensive for a lot of years. I wonder if he's going to target someone in the first round of the draft. And I know we're talking offensive line, but if you're not targeting a tackle, you can get, you could use both second-round picks on interior offensive linemen and have one of them starting in year one, and maybe you sign another guard in free agency. So I think he can address the offensive line in the draft, and I would suspect more likely that he goes edge in round one of the draft and doesn't pay big for an edge. Like he can go into the draft with basically saying, we've got Sweat, we've got Walker, we've got Booker, a Jacob Martin type, whether he's brought back or someone like him. We like our edges. Like you can sell that in March and then go get a top 15 edge in round one. And there are some good ones. So that's what I'm wondering, if that's more likely what he does. All right. How about Cav Manning? Now hear me out. I know they don't fire coaches midseason, but if they did, what about having a Jeff Saturday situation, have Olin Kreutz interim since we have O&D coordinators, having him make decisions and challenges and timeouts and going for it, and not to discipline players, etc. I don't like that idea, Cav. I know a lot. I love Olin. He's feisty. He's a great Bear, but bringing in a guy who has not been a part of the routine, like Jeff Saturday, like let's not forget, was an utter disaster for like 6 weeks. Like it was a mess. He didn't know what he was doing out there. So that is not something I am interested in doing. I don't think that's smart. If they fire Matt Eberflus, I want Ryan Poles to tell the interim, this is the type of mentality I want to instill. Go forward with this. Thomas Brown is the OC. Eric Washington is the DC, and Richard Hightower is like the interim head coach. That's the kind of move I would make if I was Ryan Poles and George McCaskey and they fired someone in midseason. But again, I don't think it's going to happen, so I think it's hypothetical. All right, Lafferty Daniel. I love Lafferty Daniel. That is a great handle on Twitter. Gilmore Happy. How many more L's do we need to absolutely be certain this nightmare will conclude at the season's end? Because if we were done already, be done already, so to speak. So, of course, Lafferty Daniel wants to get rid of Matt Eberflus and wants to do it sooner rather than later, but wants to know, how can we make sure he's gone at the end of the year? I think we're pretty close to that anyway. I mean, like 4-6 right now, 10-7 is what you need to make the playoffs. So 10-7, that would save him, but they're going to go 6-1 with that schedule. I don't think so. 5-2 gets you to 9-8. That would make me nervous. 9-8, they won't make the playoffs, but that would make me nervous. So would that do it? 8-9 or worse at this point. I don't think, going 4-3 and finishing 8-9 with this collapse in the middle, his 3 offensive coordinators in 3 years, I don't think it can save him. So I think we're pretty close there, but I would say 7-10, which is not, I mean, that's 3-4 down the stretch here. That's almost a certainty at this point, right? I would think 7-10 with no shown signs of improvement. When everyone thought the Bears were the hot team, 7-10 is where I would say, Mr. Lafferty Daniel, that they would absolutely make a change. And I think more likely this team goes like 6-11. I think that's probably where they end up, and everything is definitely set in stone at that point. All right, let's get to a couple more here. Dylan H. What else needs to be happened for Eberflus to get fired? You got to have a tone here. The Bears just need to keep losing games. Caleb Williams hopefully looks a little better under Thomas Brown. But again, Caleb Williams looking awful before Thomas Brown and looking better after Thomas Brown. Matt Eberflus doesn't get any credit for that. Thomas Brown does. All right, David Cromlow. What do you think of Cardinals OC Drew Petzing as a possible replacement for Matt Eberflus? I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I haven't done a lot of research on other OCs yet, David. I know that's kind of a cop-out answer. He's certainly doing some good things with Kyler Murray right now. My guess would be is that he is not ready yet, that's going to be too rapid of an advancement, because you got to let defenses have a chance to basically recalibrate with an offensive coordinator. And I'll bring up Bobby Slowick, who was everybody's favorite last year, didn't get a job, and now doesn't look great as the offensive coordinator with the Texans. And I don't know how many chances he's going to get this year. So you got to be careful with guys that skyrocket up. The fact that Ben Johnson has consistently done this with Jared Goff is what makes him such an interesting candidate. All right, we got a lot of questions here. I'll get to as many as I can. We'll do this kind of rapid fire. Let's go with Ryan Schlanzer. Would Ben Johnson still want to come here? I think if you gave Ben Johnson enough money with Caleb Williams sitting here and enough pieces, I would let him bring Hank Fraley, make him the offensive coordinator / run game coordinator, and he's still kind of the offensive line coach. I would do something like that, and I would make sure I get Ben Johnson here, and I would make Ben Johnson turn down the Bears, Not where Ben Johnson's like, yeah, of course I'm not going for a 5-year, $25 million contract. You give Ben Johnson a fat deal and you tell him, come here and coach Caleb Williams and let him say, no, thank you. Dolomite 79, would Poles follow Flus out the door? I think it's 50-50 right now, but I would say most likely he does stay, and I think that is probably the right decision. Kurt asks, given that Eberflus is definitely gone, who are your top 3 candidates who would you like to see interview for the head coaching job? Ben Johnson is at the top of the list. I don't have a 2 and a 3 right now, and again, that is a cop-out answer. I need to ask people about Joe Brady and what they think of him. You know, I don't just have opinions. You know, I like to try and ask people who have been around organizations and around coaches. Todd Monken, I think, is probably too old at 60 years old to become a head coach at this point. I think he's probably an offensive coordinator. That's a name I hear. Joe Brady, you know, that's it. Like who are going to be the guys that command? Like Ben Johnson, you can tell commands a room. So I'm obviously going to start doing research on this. I haven't done a lot yet, but you know, Mike Vrabel, a guy like that, you can sit there. I don't think the Bears would hire a guy like Mike Vrabel. He's a hard ass. He's not the nicest guy in the world, which you may say you need, but that's not usually how they operate at Hallis Hall. All right, Andrew Betke. Despite Thomas Brown calling a pretty good game, would it be the most Bears thing ever to fire Flus at the end of the season and promote Brown to head coach? I mean, Thomas Brown hasn't been an offensive coordinator for a whole season. If you add up Carolina and what he's going to do with the Bears here on the second half, that would be a wild promotion. I don't think the Bears would do that, but could I see the Bears bring in another defensive coach and tell them they got to keep Thomas Brown? I could see that. I don't know where this is going to go right now. I don't know where it's going, but it's messy, and we know it's messy. Clayton Cons, man, excuse me again. Are we sure trading for and paying Sweat was a good move by Poles? Absolutely, 100%. I totally support that. I like Ryan Poles giving up assets to make sure he gets exclusive negotiating windows. I'm good with it. Sweat does bring high pressure rates. He is not the problem. The Bears, he can't do everything. He's not Khalil Mack, but he didn't get paid like Khalil Mack. He got paid like Khalil Mack did in 2018, and that's 6 years later with contracts going up. So I have no problem with Montez Sweat. Oak Lightning, what is the best case scenario for the Bears at this moment in the season? On one hand, I want Caleb to succeed and Flus to get fired. How do those go hand in hand? I think it's pretty easy. The Bears' schedule is so hard, and Matt Eberflus is so bad in one-score games that the Bears can go 2-5 down the stretch, finish 6-11, and Caleb Williams can actually look pretty good. So I don't think it's too hard to marry those right now, Oak Lightning. You'd like Caleb to win some games and feel good about some things, but yeah, I agree. You don't want Caleb Williams to get so good they go 6-1, and everyone's like, Matt Eberflus is the guy. That would be a disaster. Let's go with UNILIC4. Should Flus have gone for it on 4th and 3 on the second to last drive of the game? Like, you can make that point, especially the way the offense was playing. I love, by the way, that Caleb Williams could give me the ball when he went for it on the first 4th down. I'm okay with it. I'm a points guy a lot of times. I'm okay with it. I'm not as aggressive as Dan Campbell is on 4th down. So I didn't go crazy about that. I did have a problem with the challenge. A lot of people disagreed with me. Oh, you got to challenge that. You don't, because I thought it was clearly a catch. The hand was underneath the ball. I didn't think there was – I know the ball moved, but there was no way they were going to overturn that. And Matt Eberflus challenged it anyway and lost the timeout. I had more of a problem with that, and, of course, had a massive problem with them not advancing the ball to try and go for the game-winning field goal. Brian Steele goated. Is there any hope that a blowout on Thanksgiving would spell the end of the Eberflus era, or are they going to take things to January? Again, that's the spot to do it. And if Ben Johnson has a Jacksonville-type 52-6 game on national television, who knows what could happen? But the Bears play well against Ben Johnson. I mean, I'm not expecting them to win, but could I see a 27-17 game on Thanksgiving? I absolutely could. Basola, how does the league see the role of George McCaskey in this turmoil that the Bears are into? Is he safe, or does he carry a good amount to blame? Well, George McCaskey, I love Sylvie when he says the fish rots at the head. George McCaskey is to blame for all of this because it is his tenure. So 100% George is to blame. But the league loves the fact that the Hallis family still owns the Bears. The league, what do you think? The league's going to force the McCaskies out? Not a chance. They can run that team into the ground for 50 years. The league will be happy as long as they can say, that's George Hallis's grandson. They'll be thrilled. And we'll finish with Bear Down. Baba Bear. Worst hire so far, Eberflus or Warren? It's Eberflus, hands down. Kevin Warren hasn't done anything wrong. I know a lot of people are pissed about what's going on with the stadium. But again, this is a lot of stuff that Ted Phillips did before Kevin Warren was even here. Kevin Warren may not have gone things this way. He may have done things in a different capacity. He's trying to fix Ted Phillips's messes and then move everything forward. So I do not have a problem with the Kevin Warren hire. It's too early to tell on that one. But Matt Eberflus, easily the worst hire here. All right, wrapping it up with a little Minnesota Vikings talk. I think they're going to lose. Why? Because the Minnesota Vikings are a better coach team, and the Bears don't even have that much less talent than Minnesota, but it comes down to coaching. Kevin O'Connell is a better offensive coach and a better head coach than Thomas Brown and Matt Eberflus. And Brian Flores is a better coach than Matt Eberflus. So bottom line here is this is a better coach football team. The Vikings are beatable. The Bears have a chance in this game, but that's going to be a lot of blitzing. And I know Caleb has done well against blitzing lately, but the Brian Flores blitzing is aggressive. We will see how he will do. He's going to make a couple mistakes. Caleb will on protections, and he's going to get hit a few times. That's inevitable. We're going to see what Brian Flores and what Thomas Brown can do to offset some of these blitzes and make sure that Caleb's getting the ball out quick before Brian Flores can get to him. So we'll see what happens here. I expect this to be close. I think the Bears defense will rattle Sam Darnold a little bit. I think the Caleb offense won't look as good as it did against the Packers because the blitzing, I think, will be a bit of a problem. But I think it'll still look okay. It's going to look better than it did the weeks prior. So I think we're looking at a competitive game that the Bears will be in the mix in the fourth quarter, but they will lose another one-score game because Matt Eberflus probably gets out-coached, and we're probably talking about another decision that he made next week. It would not surprise me at all. So we'll say Vikings 20, Bears 16. We'll talk to you next week. Bear down, everybody. Adios.